Have you ever wondered why mathematicians sometimes write a small number above another number? For example, what does this mean? 4 squared. And why is it connected to a square-shaped grid? In this lesson, we're going to start with something you can see. We'll explore square grids, discover a faster way to count them, and then learn how this connects to multiplication and exponents. By the end of this lesson, you'll understand exactly what it means to square a number. First, look carefully at this image. How many blue squares can you see? Take a moment to think about it. Did you count 4? That's correct. There are 4 blue squares. This time, there are more squares. How many blue squares can you see? Take a few seconds to think about it. Did you choose 9? That's correct. There are 9 blue squares. But how did you calculate the answer? Did you count every single square one by one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That works. But what if the grid becomes much bigger? Imagine having a grid with 100 squares. Would you really count them one by one? That would take a long time. So, is there a faster way? Yes. Instead of counting every square individually, we can look at the number of squares on each side. Let's take a look at this grid. There are 4 squares across, and there are 4 squares down. So, instead of counting every square one by one, we can multiply the number of squares on one side by the number of squares on the other side. 4 times 4 equals 16. So, this grid contains 16 small squares. Now, let's look at something important. This grid has 4 squares across and 4 squares down. The two sides have exactly the same number of squares. We are multiplying the same number by itself. 4 times 4. When we multiply a number by itself, we have a special way to write it. Instead of writing 4 times 4, we can write 4 squared. We write it using a small number 2 at the top. 4 squared equals 16. But what does this small 2 actually mean? The 2 tells us that we are using the number 4 2 times as a factor. So, 4 squared means 4 times 4. And 4 times 4 equals 16. Now, let's connect everything we have learned. We can represent a square number in 3 different but connected ways. First, we can see it as a square grid. In this example, the grid has 4 squares on each side. Second, we can represent it as a multiplication. 4 times 4 equals 16. And third, we can use an exponent. 4 squared equals 16. These are 3 different representations of the same mathematical idea. Let's test your understanding. What is 3 squared? Take a few seconds to think about it. The answer is 9. Because 3 squared means 3 times 3. 3 times 3 equals 9. Now, look at this grid. Which expression represents this grid? Remember to look at how many squares there are on each side. The correct answer is 3 squared, or 3 to the power of 2, represents 3 times 3, which equals 9. What is 5 squared? Take a moment to calculate it. The answer is 25. 5 squared means 5 times 5. And 5 times 5 equals 25. Here's another one. What is 7 squared? Did you get 49? That's correct. 7 squared means 7 times 7, which equals 49. Now, let's connect everything together. Look at this 6 by 6 grid. Which expressions represent this grid? The correct answer is D, both B and C. 6 times 6 is equal to 6 squared. And both equal 36. Now that you understand the concept of square numbers, let's look at some important examples. 1 squared is 1. 2 squared is 4. 3 squared is 9. 4 squared is 16. And 5 squared is 25. Let's continue. 6 squared is 36. 7 squared is 49. 8 squared is 64. 9 squared is 81. And 10 squared is 100. These are some of the most important square numbers to remember. Here are the square numbers from 1 to 20. Take some time to look at them and become familiar with these values. Remember that each one comes from multiplying a number by itself. For example, 20 squared means 20 times 20, which equals 400. Now it's time for your final challenge. What number is missing? What number squared equals 64? Did you say 8? That's correct. 8 squared equals 64 because 8 times 8 equals 64. And we can also represent this as an 8x8 grid containing 64 squares. So, what have we learned today? A square number can be represented visually using a square grid. We can calculate the total number of squares by multiplying the number of squares on one side by the number of squares on the other side. When both sides have the same number of squares, we multiply the number by itself. And we can write this using an exponent. For example, a 4x4 grid has 16 squares. 4 times 4 equals 16, and 4 squared equals 16. So remember, the visual model, the multiplication, and the exponent all represent the same mathematical idea. Now it's time to put your knowledge to the test. Welcome to quiz time. We're going to start with some medium-level questions and gradually make them more challenging. Remember what you've learned about square numbers, multiplication, and exponents. Are you ready? Let's begin! Let's start with a medium-level question. What is 8 squared? Take a few seconds to think about it. The correct answer is 64. 8 squared means 8 times 8. 8 times 8 equals 64. Now let's work backwards. Which number squared equals 81? Think carefully. The answer is 9. Because 9 times 9 equals 81. So, 9 squared is 81. Look carefully at this grid. There are 7 squares across and 7 squares down. How many small squares are there altogether? Remember, you don't need to count every square individually. 7 times 7 equals 49. So, there are 49 small squares. We can also write this as 7 squared. Now let's make it a little more difficult. Which of these numbers is not a square number? Look carefully at the options. The correct answer is 54. 36 is 6 squared. 49 is 7 squared. And 64 is 8 squared. But 54 cannot be written as a whole number multiplied by itself. Let's increase the difficulty. What is 12 squared? Try to calculate it without a calculator. 12 squared means 12 times 12. The answer is 144. Now let's reverse the question again. Which number squared equals 144? Think about the square numbers you have learned. The answer is 12. 12 times 12 equals 144. Therefore, 12 squared equals 144. Here's a more challenging problem. A square garden has an area of 169 square meters. What is the length of each side? Remember, the area of a square is found by multiplying the side length by itself. Which number multiplied by itself gives 169? The answer is 13. 13 times 13 equals 169. So, each side of the garden is 13 meters long. Here's your final challenge. You'll need to use everything you've learned so far. What is 15 squared plus 4 squared? First, calculate 15 squared. 15 times 15 equals 225. Now calculate 4 squared. 4 times 4 equals 16. Finally, add the two results together. 225 plus 16 equals 241. So, the correct answer is 241.